What did God do on the Sabbath day?
What did God do on the Sabbath? We just talked about that.
Should have asked what was the seventh day?
No, it's Sabbath day.
It's called the Sabbath.
So what was the seventh day called?
The Sabbath day.
The Sabbath. Good job. Okay, so I was asking a serious question before. What do you do when you rest? Because seriously, this is a big question, especially for Jews, even today. What if you're going to honor the Sabbath day? How do you rest? What does it mean to rest? And there's lots of debate about that. Does that mean relax and enjoy, go for a bike ride, go for a nice walk, sit by a lake? What was it? Cleanse yourself? That was the one. I'm not sure what that means, but it sure sounds funny. But what else? What would you say?
Like stay with your family?
Stay with your family, hang out with your family.
Yeah, like maybe go to a movie or something.
Maybe go to a movie.
Just not do a lot of like work and chores and stuff.
Don't do work and chores. Okay, that's a great answer.
Read the Bible.
Read the Bible. You should honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That seems like that's a good commandment, doesn't it? Yes.
Sit on the couch and
Sit on the couch
watch TV.
and watch TV. One more.
Sleep in.
Sleep in. Okay. So, seriously, this is a serious question because the rule that especially when you're Jewish, you look to the teachers. So there's the rule, but then teachers come along, rabbis, and interpret the rule and try to help you understand how to honor the rule best. Okay? And so there's lots of different rabbis that come up with different ideas on how that should work. They all agree that you shouldn't do any work. You should rest. Because God worked for 6 days, rested on the seventh. But that question of how do you rest? How do you not do work? Did I tell you the story of when I was in Israel and this question came up? I already told it?
No.
So I shouldn't tell it again? I told it last year? Okay, well, I'll tell you it really quick. So when I was there a bunch of years ago, we were out one night. We were coming back, and this lady in the middle of the street says to me, hey, or to our group, we had about 4 of us, hey, could you come up to my apartment because my refrigerator light is on? And it was like, what? And she said, yeah, my refrigerator's on. I need you to come up to my apartment to turn it off. And we're all like, well, can't you just turn it off yourself? And no, it's the Sabbath. I'm not allowed to do work. I can't turn off the light I can't close the door. That would be work. And part of the rule that one rabbi came up with is you should not affect the energy of the world. So you're not allowed to turn light switches on because that changes the energy, right? And so closing the door would turn off that light and that would be effective. So she explained this and we walked up to her 3rd floor apartment in the dark because nobody had turned on the light switches, and we got there and it was her nice mother and her sister and they were having dinner, they were getting ready to eat dinner, but the refrigerator door was wide open. And then they explained how they had a little piece of tape on the button for the light so that it wouldn't come on when they opened the door, but the tape had come off, so they asked us to put the tape back on. And we did, and we said goodbye and had a nice little conversation, and that was that. But that was how they interpreted no work. When you go to Israel and you go to a hotel that honors the Sabbath, no work, the elevators go to every floor because you're not allowed to push a button. That's work. And so if you just get in the elevator and you ride to your floor, and when the door opens you get out, but you hope you're not on the 20th floor, right? But and they have 2 different elevators. One elevator is the elevator that honors the Sabbath and one that doesn't. So all of us Gentiles would get in the elevator and ride up and not worry about it. So that's a good example. Some people hire people to come to their house to do the work. So you can hire a cook, you can hire someone to come and do the work for you that you need done on the Sabbath day so you can still eat. But they do everything and you just kind of hang out. But there's that debate about what does it mean to do work. So anyway, yes?
So the people that were hired, were they not honorable?
They would not be Jewish. They'd be Christian. or not practicing Jewish or something like that. But they wouldn't be Jews who honor that rule. Okay? And there's all sorts of different interesting rules, like you cannot mix your dairy and your meat. And so you couldn't get a butter burger, for example. Does that make sense? So it has dairy and it has meat together. So at the buffet in our hotel, they would be careful about being kosher. That's called being kosher. Okay? So it's how you prepare things, how you honor the rules. Okay, so that's a lot about that, but one more question that somebody might have for our quiz time. Somebody new. Somebody has. Well, let me ask somebody else. Anybody else have a good question? Yes.
How did Jacob trick his father Isaac?
Okay, so how did Jacob trick his dad out of the birthright, out of his brother's birthright? Yes, Matthew.
He puts on his brother's clothes and he gets some of his own cattle and, goats I think, and he puts goat skin on and he makes his father a stew and goes and uses his brother's voice because his brother is hairy and he's wearing his clothes, so because his dad is blind.
That's a great answer, thank you. So he pretended to be his brother by doing all those things. Since his brother was the hairy one, he put on goat skin on his arms, he wore his brother's clothing, he made food just like his brother would make it, and he pretended to be his brother, and he tricked his dad out of it. So, yes?
How come Isaac couldn't tell by the way that he sounded?
Well, there was that question. He said, you sound a lot like my other son. He says, no, it's, he believed him, and he should have, right? He believed him, but he did ask that question. You sound an awful lot like Jacob, my other brother. Are you sure you're Esau? Yes, I'm Esau. Oh, okay. So, all right. Yes, one more. Okay.
Okay, so they call the big on Father's Day, what does Easter mean? Because Christmas has the word Christ in it, but Easter just seems like such a random one.
That's a great random question. Let's talk about it later. All right? I'm going to confuse everybody. So, let's talk about it later. So, let's get into our topic tonight. So, we ended last week where Moses was dying. Okay? So, essentially, let's see if I can make this work. Moses dies in the wilderness. So, you remember the story? We talked about the 10 plagues. We talked about the Passover event. That whole story. Those of us who were at the retreat, we watched the movie, Prince of Egypt. And it was just kind of reminding of the whole story of the Israelites, how they were in bondage at the beginning of Exodus, how Moses comes and God frees them, goes to war with Pharaoh. They cross through the Red Sea and finally end up free from the Egyptians. And they're now out in the wilderness, right? We talked about how did they live out there. God continued to provide for them for 40 years as they wandered around this little place, the wilderness, until finally, literally, they had to wait till the last person would die that was part of the generation that had distrusted God by making the golden calf. So once that whole generation had passed away, and the new generation had been trained, had learned to trust God by God providing bread for them every day, by God providing meat in the form of quail, by God providing water literally out of rocks. Once they learned to trust God and honor God's commandments, then they were allowed to cross over and begin going into the promised land. But Moses does not go into the promised land. He literally watches them cross as he sits up on a ridge. And that's how the whole story ends, with him literally being buried, not in the promised land, being buried on the other side. And I actually was looking for the mountain range. So if you go to the Dead Sea, let's see if I can pull up the picture. Here's a picture. If you go to the Dead Sea is extremely dry. This is looking out across, so it's this mountain range that the way Israel works is to the north they have the Sea of Galilee, which is where the river starts. It flows down through Israel, giving the whole countryside nice, lush land, but it gathers all this mineral and salt, and by the time it finally ends, it ends at the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is literally it's all salt. When you go in the Dead Sea today, it's kind of a tourist destination because when you go in it, it's so salty you can't sink. You float on the top. And so when you go out and I did this, it's kind of cool. The tradition is you bring a newspaper and you read the newspaper out there in the middle of the lake because you can't go down, and so you have this newspaper. It's kind of just one of those funny traditions. But it's so salty, you can only be in it for about, I think at most probably a half an hour, because your skin just starts to turn red, it starts to get really itchy. And if you make the mistake of getting any water in your eyes like I did, it burns, it just burns. I made the mistake of, I had been wearing a hat the whole day, and I'm like, oh, my hair is really a mess. And I did that, and the water dripped into my eyes, and it was like, ah! And literally it burned so bad, you're like, you can't open them. And you're like, I cannot see. And so people had to bring me fresh water to wash it out. And so it's really, really salty. It's just, they say nothing grows in it because it's so salty, but they have found microorganisms in the water. Yes.
If you wore goggles and like tried to swim down, would you not be able to swim down?
It pushes you up, yeah. And then the sand, it's not really sand, on the bottom of the lake is like a clay. And so people collect that, and so you buy these expensive like ointments that are made from Dead Sea materials, minerals. It's really expensive stuff, and so right around that whole area they have all these cosmetic factories that make this stuff. Anyway, right on the other side of that mountain range, and by the way, it's super hot. It's like, it must have been like 120 the day we were there. It's really hot. But that area is right where they started to enter in to the promised land, going into Israel. They started from that area, and Moses stops right there as the rest of the Israelites start to go. We're talking, by the way, I don't even know what the number was, probably 40, 50,000 people that start to go into the promised land, okay? So that's really important. So that's a little bit of a picture. There were a couple fresh springs, and that's where those trees are from. All right, turn this off. Come on. Turn this back on. So, Moses dies. That's how the end of that story goes. But he has one of his leaders, Joshua, take over. So Joshua comes in, and Moses has said, now make sure you honor everything we've been learning. You know, what have we been learning? I mean, what's the main rule that they've been learning while they've been wandering around for 40 years? Yeah.
Trust God.
Trust God. Okay? And what is the rule? If you're trusting God, who is God? You would say that God is your king. Okay, that's a really important point. God is their ruler. God is their king. Okay, and so they need to learn to trust God. Yes? I am?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Yep. Which comes out of the name Yahweh, which is the name for God. Okay? So they called this name so precious, so holy, that you weren't even allowed to speak it. If you spoke it, the belief was you would die. So you cannot even speak God's name. But so they've been learning to trust God. They've been learning that God is the one that provides. And so as they enter into this new land, they have, before they go in, Moses is like, okay, everybody, remember, we've been learning this, and you need to remember it. So when you get into the promised land, you need to trust God. God is your ruler. God is your king. And that means, what should you not do?
Don't worship anyone else.
Don't worship any other false gods. Okay? Which is what all the other countries do. Don't do that. Alright? I am right? God says, I am the living God. You know, don't worship false idols. Yes.
Like, don't ask for another king.
And don't ask for another king. God is your king, okay? So, they start to enter into the promised land, and they get there, and it's not just like this land that they just get to have. What happens?
They meet other people.
What happens? Yeah.
Don't they, take someone else or something?
So people own the land, and so anybody know that song? Joshua fought the battle called Jericho, Jericho. You know that one? Jericho, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Right? You know that song? So, so that's a great example. As they get to Jericho, one of the first cities they come to in that southern land is just a little bit north of the Dead Sea. They get there, and it's well fortified. They have this huge wall that goes around the city. And they get there, and they're like, well, how are we going to do this? And they are told that if they just go around it, blow their trumpets a bunch of times, God will take care of it, and the walls will come tumbling down. And that's exactly what happens. And then, the horrible part of the story is, they go in and they take over. And what it means to take over is kill everybody. So they go in and they kill everybody, and they also not only kill everybody, they kill all the animals. This is taking over. This is what this means. And partially it's because they don't want to have anyone there that is going against their rule, their laws. All the laws that we even just talked about, You're supposed to not work on the Sabbath. You're supposed to honor God. You're not supposed to do these things. And if they have anybody there that's not honoring those laws, they really believe, and for good reason, especially from 40 years of wandering in the desert, that God will not support them anymore. Okay? And so, this is what it means to come in and take over this land. They literally come in and wipe out the people that are there, and they take over. And that's kind of what happens in this day and age. In that day and age, often it became they would take over a land, and their warriors would come in, and then when the people all ran away, they would gather again. They'd come back and try and take back their land. It just became this warring history that goes on. So that's a big deal. As I mentioned, Joshua leads the Israelites into the promised land, and the conquest takes over. So they literally take over this whole area that we now know as Israel. Okay, the land of Israel. Now, when they get there, do you remember about how we talked about how Jacob had how many sons?
12.
He had 12 sons, right. And so those 12 sons become tribes. So while they've been wandering around in the desert, they've been gathering as groups. And they would say, okay, the Levites, they should go gather over here, and we're going to give you a specific job. So each of the sons became one of a tribe. And even after they died, those tribes continued to see their identity. It's kind of like saying, the Smiths and the Mankeys, and you have these different last names almost. That's kind of how they identified with the different groups. And they were a clan, they were a tribe. So when they finally get to taking over the promised land, they divide up the whole land by those tribes again. Each group gets a different area. All right? And so they each get a different section. Now, when they get there, they have to figure things out again. All right? They figured it out in the wilderness. Now they're here in this promised land. They have to figure out how to do this again. And unfortunately, they're in a whole new area. They kind of knew how to do it out in the wilderness. Now they get into different areas where they have to learn how to be farmers. Do any of you guys know how to be a farmer? You do? Okay, we got one. Anybody else actually would know how to actually go out and actually farm and grow crops and do all that? And you gotta milk your cows, otherwise they explode. Yeah. It did explode. It's terrible. They hurt themselves. So that's kind of their problem. they get to this new land, and they have to figure out how to raise crops. They have to figure out how to raise crops, how to, what crops will work in that area, how to have livestock, to give them milk, all that stuff. And then they also have to figure out, if you think about Wauwatosa, or Brookfield, or any of the cities we come from, West Dallas, Milwaukee, you think about what you need to have a city. What kind of things do you need to have a city? Okay, man.
People?
People, okay, you need people, that's true. You need shelters, people need to live in houses, that's important. In thinking about like the structure of a city, I mean, people, houses, food, yes. I'm thinking more like government. I'm thinking about how do you run a city? What kind of things? So you need to have some laws, because you know what? I bet if we really talked about it, we wouldn't agree on how we want to live. I'm a night owl and I stay up till 3 in the morning. I really like to play loud music at 3 in the morning. It's the best time to hear the loud music. And then my neighbor's going, you know what? I go to bed at 9. I really like peace and quiet. And I like to get up and meditate in the morning. And if you've kept me up till 3 in the morning with the loud music, we're not agreeing on how life is good. Right? Yeah. Government officials. You need people that help you to think about the laws, help you think about what is best for how do we improve our city, because everybody has different ideas about that. And then, are we going to collect taxes that help us to pay for, services and help us to rebuild our city and make it bigger and better? And, imagine if you didn't have electricity. You ever thought about that, what life would be like without electricity? Well, do you know what? In order to have electricity, you have to have people that know how to run electricity. You have to have people that understand how to do the wires that come to your house. And then when there's a big storm like happened in Puerto Rico or Houston or in Florida, when the power lines go down, you have to have people that understand how to do that. So that's one of those infrastructure things you need. And then there's a really important job that is really necessary, that enforces the laws. What are those people? Policemen, police people, right? What's that? So they're people that protect, that watch over, that help you with those disputes, right? Like, I like my 3 a.m. loud music, and I don't like your 3 a.m. They're the people that show up when you're disagreeing on things and help to try to hopefully smooth it over, right? And when there become times where there's not a smoothing over, you have to take that up to the next person, the person called a judge, or maybe bring in a jury, and they help to decide, 3 a.m. music is not the coolest, and I'm sorry, you need to knock it off, right? It's not good for all of us for our sleep. So you create these systems, and that's really important. And so as they are working on moving into this system, they actually need people that will help them to do all those things, and they end up putting together what they call judges. So it's instead of having a ruler or a king, they don't have kings, because who's their king? God, thank you. And God is their king, so they don't have a king. They have rulers, they have judges. And the judges are the ones that help them figure out what's right, what's wrong, how are we going to get along, how are we going to do this. But you know what keeps happening? And it happens time after time after time again. What happens? Yeah.
Like, they start making up other gods.
They start worshiping false gods. And what happens as soon as they start to do that, start to not honor their heritage, not honor their faith, God pulls back. And other countries start to come in and invade, and things go wrong for them, and they all get into this place where they're like, everything's terrible! Why is it terrible? And then somebody finally goes, maybe because we're not following what God told us to do. And then everybody goes, yeah, that's it. And then they come back to God, they worship God again, they reform what they're doing, they bring in a new judge. You know, usually the judge dies off, and then they fall away into sin, and then new judge comes in, and everything gets better again. And it becomes this cycle of getting good again, everything's great, we got a new judge, and now we're forgetting, and sinning again. And oh, here we come again. And it becomes this cycle after cycle. So the judges are the people that help to lead. Now, I wanted to, that doesn't work. I was hoping I could zoom in. Come on. I gave you a handout. You guys saw the handout? That showed all the Old Testament history books. By the way, this whole section is all on what we would call the section of history. So we have the Torah, which we would call the law books. Now we're into the history section of the Old Testament. And the history is talking about how the Israelites lived, how they grew, and how they became a nation. Okay? What I wanted to point out on this one sheet was the line, the book of Judges. And you'll notice it's about a 400-year period. It's when Israel is asking for God, for people to be their leaders. And God keeps saying, and by the way, they keep asking God for a king. And God's like, no, you don't want a king. I'm your king. And God says, I'll give you another judge. And there's a listing of judges. By the way, one is a female, Deborah. And I bet a bunch of you know the last one of the last ones, Samson. Remember Samson and Delilah?
Yeah.
Remember the story where he has this long hair and he's super strong, right? And his strength is believed. Hold on to the ball, please. Thank you. Is believed to come from his hair. And she comes at night and cuts his hair, and he loses all his strength, and they gouge his eyes out. And then his hair grows again, and he gets his strength, and they think he's just this blind guy, and he goes and he has this incredible strength again, and he knocks down, I believe it's a Colosseum, and kills everybody. So, it's an interesting story. Anyway, this story of the Judges leads us into when we finally get kings. And that sounds like it should be a great thing that we get kings. But I want us to read a section from 1 Samuel 8. So if you have your Bibles, open up to 1 Samuel 8.
Yes, he's the last one is Samuel. What gives you a Israelite three, boy. I'm the smartest one in the group.
I like books about
No, we all didn't know what taxes were that.
We're supposed to
Because Brayden was like, I love taxes. What? No, I said I love taxes.
Alright, before we read this, I've got a skit, a group that's going to be doing our skit for us. So, I want them to come up and give us a skit for tonight. Ready? Skit me. Use the
I have to.
And now, the St. Matthew's Not Ready for Any Time Players proudly presents We Want a King. We take you to the protest outside the tent of Samuel, the judge of Israel.
We want a king. We want a king. We want a king.
What's all the commotion?
It appears to me that people are demanding a king, sir.
A king? God doesn't want them to have a king. Kings are trouble.
We want a king. We want a king.
Quiet, quiet, quiet! Thank you. Now what's all this king business?
We want us a potentate.
No, a regal emperor.
No. We want us an imperial constitutional monarchy.
Oh, what?
They mean they want a king.
Yeah, we want a king. We want a king.
Quiet, quiet, quiet! Thank you. What do you want a king for? Isn't God's rule enough?
Well, God's rule is nice.
But it isn't enough.
We want us something a little more, tangible.
What?
They mean they want something a little more visible. It's hard for people to visualize God, so they want someone to represent God for them. You know, someone like the king.
Yeah. We want a king. We want a king.
Quiet, quiet, quiet! What on earth do you want a king for? Do you know how much troubles kings are?
But all the other nations around us have kings.
Yeah, what he said.
What he said.
That's a stupid reason. All the other nations jumped off cliffs.
I don't think that's going to work, sir. Too patriarchal.
So unpatriotical. Sue me. Okay, you're right. Another tax. Why don't you just stick with the system of judges? God has a place to rule you.
We've been wandering in this nomadic existence long enough, and now that we're settling down,
What you need to say is, how are we going to be a great nation unless we look like everybody else?
Yeah, like everybody else.
And exactly how do they look?
They have kings, sir.
yeah, we want a king. We want a
Quiet,
king.
quiet, quiet! A king will demand loyalty from you.
That's okay.
Let's be loyal.
Yeah, like everybody else.
A king will make demands, set laws. Aren't laws good enough? God's laws good enough?
No, we need new ones.
Yeah.
New ones? Like what?
Like the law of gravity.
Yeah, gravity.
Yeah, we want gravity. We need gravity. What is gravity?
A king will draft your children into armies, take your sons, steal your daughters for your tax the best of your fields and flocks.
That's okay. We want taxes.
Yeah, we love taxes.
Yeah, what's taxes?
You're better off living with God's law and with the judges in the past, with judges in place.
But we want to be like everybody else.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah, we want a king. We want a king.
You better do what we tell you and appoint us one that God approves of, or we'll go pick one out ourselves.
I'm warning you, God wants you to serve and obey only God. And in that day that you have a king, your cry will go out, but the Lord will not answer.
That's all right. Yeah.
We'll just call someone else.
Yeah, we'll call the king.
We want a king. We want a king.
Better give them what they want, sir. You'll have a riot on your hands.
Okay, I'll do it. But I guarantee you they're not gonna like it.
We want a king.
Quiet, quiet, quiet! I'll do as you wish. I will anoint Saul, son of Kish, the first king of Israel. And after him, David. And David Solomon. And after that, a whole slew of miserable deposits will follow.
Yeah. We like deposits.
We adore this spot.
Yeah, we do. What's a despot?
A despot is a rotten, miserable, low-down, dictatorial, and united king.
Yeah. King? Yeah.
Yeah, we want a despot.
And so Samuel finally gave in. He anointed Saul, first king of Israel, and after Saul came David, and then Solomon. And after that came a whole slew of miserable, rotten, and within a few years, instead of giving their allegiance to God, the nation of Israel had just become like everyone else. And their cheers eventually changed to, you can probably guess it.
Down with the king. Down with the king.
Quiet, quiet, quiet! Somebody call 911. Quiet!
Hey.
I will be signing autographs.
Nobody wants your autograph. We want a king. Good job, guys. Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, exactly what that just said goes 1 Samuel 8. And just like the skit says, Israel starts asking for a king. And they've been asking for a king throughout the whole book of Judges. But here's where it comes to a head. So there is a prophet named Samuel, and he is helping to guide the people, and he's one of the judges. So when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his first one was Joel, and the second was Abijah, and then they served Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. They're not good guys. Now, appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations." So they're saying exactly what was in that skit, aren't they? And that sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? We want to be like all the other nations. But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you that they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. So this is God talking. They've rejected me as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them. But warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him to be a king, for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will have to run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants, your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys. He will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you on that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." So when Samuel heard all the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." So, that skit seemed kind of silly, didn't it? But that's exactly what is going on in this section. They want to be like all the other nations that have kings. And he's trying to say, you know what? It sounds great to have a king, but that's not the way this is going to work. And so this is where the kingdoms begin. And I want us to look at our other handout. Let me just mention. So there end up being, remember how I told you that they divided the land into 12 different tribes, into 12 different areas? Now, when they have their first king, Saul, Samuel anoints Saul, and Saul becomes the king. Yes, sneezer. Bless you. Thank you. It's the best place to sneeze is in church because everybody blesses you. It's a great thing. So they anoint Saul, but Saul is really not that great a guy. But what he does is he unites all 12 tribes, and they become one nation. And they become the nation of what? Israel. And remember where that name came from, Israel?
Jacob.
Came from Jacob, right? When he wrestles at the ford of the Jabbok with that angel at night. And they wrestle all night long. He finally says, let me go. It's dawn. I need to go. And he's like, no, not until you bless me. And he goes, I'll bless you. I'll give you a new name. It's now Jacob. It's now Israel, which means, what does Israel mean? What did he just do with the angel? One who wrestled with God. So the name Israel literally means one who wrestles with God. And guess what? What has the Israelites been doing all this time? They've been wrestling with God. Out in the wilderness, now in the promised land, over judges, dishonoring God, now calling for a king. And so this is the United Kingdom of Israel now. This is the first time they are a formal United Kingdom with a king. And Saul is their king. And Saul doesn't do that great a job, but they are united. Right after Saul, we have King David. Now, King David is known as the greatest king of the Old Testament. Okay? And he's known as the one that continues to follow God. Continues to live faithfully. Now, the only problem with that is the stuff he does. He does all sorts of bad stuff. And so people say, what does that mean? He's doing all this horrible stuff. How is he following God? And partially it's because he continues to worship God. All right? So just like when the Israelites wander from God, they are worshiping other gods. David continues to worship God. And so in a lot of ways, he's walking with the Lord because he continues to worship. So even when he does really horrible stuff, and by the way, the Psalms, the book of Psalms, we're going to look at those a little later, most of them, or a lot of them, are written by David. And so you get his thoughts as he's writing these this poetry down. Stop playing with these, okay? And it can't end up on the table. Go throw that in the garbage, just like that. All right? Don't do that again, please. All right. So, David, for example, I'm going to tell you a story next week that when we do the lesson on the prophets, I'm going to tell you a bad thing he does. But in one of his Psalms, he repents. And the whole Psalm, Psalm 51, is about how he has really messed up, how he's asking God to forgive him. From the pit of his soul, he's asking God to forgive him and to do the right thing. So, David unites, continues the United Kingdom. And remember, David's the one that we have the story of David and Goliath, right? Where when he's a young boy, he comes out and he tries to bring out the battle gear of Saul, but he ends up fighting and bringing down the 9-foot tall giant, Goliath, with 5 smooth stones and his slingshot, right? And so, there's a cool story about the 5 smooth stones. There's a man that always talked about the 5 smooth stones of David. And when I went to Israel, he said, do you think you could bring me 5 smooth stones? And so we actually went to the area where it was believed that battle was fought and found 5 smooth stones. We didn't go there, but the tour guide said, I will send somebody to get those, and they brought them back, and we brought them to right before he died. And we're like, here you go, 5 smooth. And it was a story, he hit Mr. Kustan, Grandpa Kustan, and he always talked about the 5 smooth stones and the power of those stones, and it's kind of cool. So anyway, David is this incredible leader. He unites the kingdom. He takes over even greater territories through conquest, through battles, okay? But you don't really look at him as this nice guy. I don't think that's always the right way to look at David, as this really nice, wonderful king, loving. They actually smooth out part of his illustration in a different book of the Bible. But really, this time in the world was pretty rough. And a lot of horrible things were done. And so they were often killing each other. These stories are a lot of killing their brothers, killing their sons, a lot of killing going on during this whole time. All right? So David takes over. King Solomon is David's son, and he takes over after him. He kills his brother. He kills a bunch of other guys in order to make sure that he's in charge. He's often seen as Solomon the Wise. So when you talk about Solomon, there's stories about his wisdom. One of the stories goes, and I'm going to get it wrong because I didn't review it beforehand, but this story about this dispute, he kind of becomes one of the judges, right? He has to handle disputes. And these 2 women that bring a baby, and they say they're both claiming that the baby is theirs. And they're like, this baby's mine. And he's like, he can't tell whose baby it really is. And so who does he give the baby to? Somebody's going to be really disappointed. He says, well, cut the baby in half, and let's give it to both of you. You can each have half of the baby. And, the person, he understands that whoever says, no, don't cut the baby in half, is the real mother. And so one of the ladies is like, no, you couldn't, don't do that, I don't want it to die. And he's like, you're the mother, you can have the baby. So it's a great story of how he used his wisdom, how he used his intellect to rule. He also built a ton of stuff. He built all sorts of, kind of like the Pharaoh when you think about it, built all sorts of things. He built the temple in Jerusalem. And this is one of those stories where God says, I don't need a temple. And they're like, yeah, you need a house to live in, God. We need to give you a house to live in. And God's like, I'm God of the universe. I've created all of this. I don't need a house. No, you need a temple. We need to give you a temple. And they keep arguing with God that you should have a temple. And so it's like, whatever. And so they build this temple, and that becomes the center place where they believe God dwells. But God's like, but I dwell everywhere. So, that's not how it works. So anyway, and Solomon is also famous for having thousands of wives. So that's another story of Solomon. So, I also gave you a handout I want you to look at. You guys have it in front of you? So that handout, you see it? So, there's a lot of depth in there, you're right. So, notice at the very top, we start with 12 tribes, right? That's what those 12 boxes are at the top. Those are the tribes of Benjamin, or I'm sorry, the tribes of Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob, they become the 12 tribes. And then after they finally get a king, it becomes Saul, he's the first king. And then we have David, and then Solomon. Now notice, those are the only 3 kings that have the United Kingdom under their watch. Okay? So only 3 kings have the United Kingdom. And then what happens is it splits into 2 countries, 2 nations. And so you have on the right Israel, and on the left Judah. And Israel is to the north, and Judah is to the south. Now, just really quick, when you say the word Judah, what do you hear in that word? Judah. Yeah. Jew. And that's where we get the name Jew. So the Jews come out of the tribe, out of the nation of Judah. Israel, you can see, they're split, and you have all the different kings that rule. Those are the names of the people going on there. And when you get a check mark, that means they were a good king. They ruled wisely. They ruled for their people, taking care of their people, helping their people. But then you have a lot that were not good, and often assassinated by their successor. So usually like a son would kill their father in order to become the new king. You also have the X showing that they were assassinated by their own people. So this whole history goes on of these really difficult kingdoms. And you'll notice on the right that Israel falls. That Israel is taken away in captivity, and they are taken away to Samaria, and that kingdom ends. The kingdom of Israel ends. It never comes back. So we would say, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, the lost tribes of Israel. Remember me saying that? That they believed that certain tribes that were a part of the northern kingdom, when they were taken away, they never came back. Now, historians tried to figure out, they were taken off and they were taken to Samaria. Did they end up getting taken to another place as slaves? How did this all work? And they tried to find the lineage and how things went. And so there's a big mystery about where did those tribes end up? Did they end up in a certain region of Europe? Where is that? And this question of the lost tribes of Israel it's one of those interesting mysteries that if you want to look on the web, they'll have all sorts of stuff. Yeah?
Is it kind of like the lost colony of Roanoke?
Sure. Yeah, what's that? That's a different class. So, yes. So, Israel never comes back. The lost tribes of Israel, that nation of Israel never comes back. You'll notice at the bottom of the left column that the kingdom of Judah gets taken away in the Babylonian exile. They live in Babylon, and they're there for, count up the years there, right? 10 years is it? No, it's more than that. It's, yeah, a whole bunch of years, 50 years. And as they're there, they are slaves in Babylon because they were taken away. And by the way, before this all happens, they have prophets telling them, we're going to talk about the prophets, because each one of these kings had prophets that would come in and say, you're messing up, you're not following God's way, you need to change. And they were always speaking for God. And one of the prophets, right before the exile, Isaiah, talks about how you're going to be taking away in fish hooks. Fish hooks are going to come in as they take you over. They're going to carry you away in fish hooks, this horrible thing. And trying to really tell the people, you need to change, you need to come back to God. Okay, so they get taken away. They are allowed to come back, though. Not to rule their own nation again, but they get to live in Israel. So the nation of Judah comes back, but they're never again until last century in charge of their own country. So they live there as Jews, but they don't get to be in charge. The Romans are the ones that are in charge of their territory. Okay, even in 70 AD, where they try to take over again, that revolt is put down, and they don't get to take over until, what was it, 1967? I forget when the 7-Day War was. In last century, where they literally come in 6 days, just have this massive onslaught and take over the land again, and they're in charge. So you have these two tribes, the divided kingdoms, lots of kings, north and south, north Israel, southern Judah, but they're continually divided. And we have all these different kings. Now, what we've been talking about tonight is the history of Israel. I didn't give you a huge, thorough breakdown of it all, but you get this sheet that we had. Let me put it back up here. This really gets into the whole history. And they really get into detail about how their whole history goes, recording every bit so they know their understanding of how their heritage is, how their kingdom goes, and where God's people continue to move. And this becomes important because when you get to the New Testament, the very beginning book, Matthew, the first thing Matthew does when he writes down his story about Jesus is he shows the lineage. And he shows the whole lineage of where Jesus came from. Going back to, this person had this son, and then this person had this son, and this person. And they show how Jesus is connected to David through the lineage. And then all the way back, they would say all the way back to Adam. And they show this, Adam and Eve. So they show this whole lineage. And that whole section is just showing the family tree. And to make the case that Jesus is mainly connected to David, because when we talk about the Messiah, do you remember who the Messiah is? Messiah is another name for the anointed one. So in the Old Testament, there becomes all these prophecies about this person who's going to come down the road, who will be called the Messiah, who is the anointed one, who will be the new king. And they even say he's going to be the son of David. But all the sons of David are nasty. So finally, they get this new king, this new son of David, who will lead the people, and he will be this wonderful king that will let them take over their land again. But when Jesus shows up, he doesn't do that. He's a king in a whole different way. And so when he enters into, on Palm Sunday, remember the Palm Sunday story where they're waving the palm branches? What are they shouting? Hosanna to the Son of David. Right? They're shouting that whole thing about, this is the Messiah. They're essentially saying, this is the Messiah, the one we've been waiting centuries for. Here he comes. This is going to be great. Okay, so this whole history, all the kings, this is important stuff because it leads to where are they going in the future. Okay, and who is this new king to come? Woo! Is that enough? Is that enough?
Yes, very much.
Did the sugar help? No?
We can get it.
All right, so you've got a little bit more time for small groups.